And welcome to One Hero a Day, where everyday courage lives on. Like and subscribe to hear a new story each night. There's a certain silence that only settles over a suburban neighborhood after dusk. The kind that feels like a held breath. Porch lights flicker on automatically. A neighbor's dog gives a half-hearted bark, and somewhere inside a modest two-bedroom home in California, a father stands still in the hallway, staring at an empty bedroom. Bryce Weiner wasn't a man given to panic. At 43, he'd built his life around routine. He worked in IT, commuted in a sensible car, and packed his daughter's school lunches with the kind of thoughtful precision only single fathers tend to master. He was steady, reliable, quiet. But that evening, in early August of 2010, the rhythm broke. The house was too quiet. His daughter Olivia had missed curfew by an hour, then 2. At first, he told himself she was with friends, maybe out of cell signal. He called, no answer, texted, nothing. She didn't usually do this. Olivia wasn't wild or rebellious. She was 14, still into sketching cartoon characters and bacon box mix brownies. This wasn't like her. By midnight, Bryce was pacing. He checked with her best friend's mom. No, she hadn't been there. He drove to the nearby park where she sometimes went to read. Empty. A strange kind of cold began curling around his stomach. He circled back home, hoping to find the front door ajar. The hallway light flipped on, her sheepish voice saying, "Sorry, I lost track of time." But the house remained still. On her desk, he found her journal missing. That was odd. The backpack she used daily was still there. Her toothbrush, hairbrush, charger, all still in place. But a smaller duffel bag from the closet was gone. And with it, a piece of Bryce's peace. By 3 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the hallway. His coffee had gone cold. The sky was starting to pale at the edges. He wanted to call someone. The police, maybe. But what would he even say? A 14-year-old girl, gone without a sound. No forced entry, no witnesses, no note. Just the ache of something missing. The sun hadn't yet broken over the neighborhood, but Bryce already knew. Something had come undone, not in a moment, but over time. And now all that was left was the quiet before the long storm. The sky above Fresno turned gray-blue as morning crept in. And still, Olivia hadn't come home. Bryce stood in the center of her room, a space that had once felt alive with messy drawings and quiet laughter. Now it was hollow. A faint scent of lavender lotion lingered in the air, and for a moment, it struck him like a memory. Olivia brushing her hair before school, humming tunelessly. He blinked and forced his focus back to the room. Details. He needed details. He examined the desk again. A pencil case had been moved, slightly askew. Beside it, a single sticky note. A doodle of a bird in flight. One of Olivia's habits. Little sketches left behind like breadcrumbs, but it meant nothing specific. Her laptop sat closed. He opened it. No password. She hadn't changed it. Relief flickered briefly. Maybe she'd messaged someone, said something. He checked the browser history, deleted. That was unusual. Olivia rarely cleared anything. She wasn't the secretive type. He opened her messaging apps. Instagram, nothing recent. But her email showed an odd pattern. A series of messages exchanged over the past 2 weeks with someone labeled R. Most were brief, but one subject line stood out. "See you soon." The timestamp was from 2 days ago. Bryce opened it. The message was chilling in its casualness. "Pack light, don't forget sunscreen. It's gonna be hot down here, can't wait to show you the ocean." R. Below it, a single image. a beach view from somewhere unfamiliar. No context. Bryce stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He clicked on the email header. The sender's address was a throwaway Gmail, nothing traceable. But the pattern of communication had escalated, once every few days, then daily, then multiple times a day. And then it stopped. The last message was that simple goodbye. He looked around her room again and noticed the duffel bag's absence more clearly. She'd packed with intention. But it didn't add up. She hadn't taken her phone charger, or deodorant, or even money. Just enough to disappear. He called the police just after 6 a.m. The officer who arrived was young and polite but distant, like someone already preparing a report he knew wouldn't matter much. He listened, nodded, took down notes. When Bryce showed him the emails, the officer skimmed through them quickly. "She probably ran away," he said gently. "We see it all the time." Bryce's chest tightened. She didn't run. Someone lured her. The officer didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Instead, he handed Bryce a pamphlet about missing teens and gave him a case number. "If she crosses state lines, it'll complicate things," he added. "But we can't assume a crime's occurred unless we have evidence of coercion or threat." Bryce asked about tracing the email. The officer shook his head. "We don't have jurisdiction to dig that deep without probable cause." And just like that, the conversation was over. The door closed, the squad car pulled away, and Bryce stood in his front yard, watching the day come alive around him. Joggers passing, sprinklers ticking across lawns, birds calling from power lines. His daughter was missing, and already the world was moving on. He went back inside and sat with her laptop again. There had to be something he'd missed. A detail, a crack. He opened her most recent files. In the photos folder, buried under school projects and old selfies, he found a screenshot. It was cropped tightly, showing only a portion of a map. Southern California near the border. He recognized the shape of the Baja Peninsula. And there, highlighted in a bright yellow marker, was a town name, Tijuana. His fingers trembled slightly as he zoomed in. She'd saved this days ago. She'd planned it. Tijuana, a place across a line. Bryce had never been. He only knew it through headlines. Border crossings, cartel violence, lost girls. The reality began to settle into his bones. Olivia wasn't just missing. She was gone. Gone south, beyond where local police could follow. And no one was coming after her. He looked back at the sticky note, the bird in flight. A daughter reaching for something she didn't understand. Somewhere out there, she was flying blind. Bryce drove to the Fresno police station that afternoon, hoping that being there in person might change something. Maybe urgency felt different face to face. Maybe they'd see the fear in his eyes, the exhaustion in his shoulders. He brought the emails, the map screenshot, and a printed version of Olivia's school photo. The detective at the front desk was calm but unmoved. "If she crossed into Mexico voluntarily, we're limited in what we can do," he said. Bryce leaned forward, his voice shaking. "She's 14. She can't consent to travel across borders with a stranger." The man hesitated. Then, "It's classified as an unauthorized border crossing, not a kidnapping, unless you can prove she was forced or threatened." Bryce stared at him. The difference in words felt like a betrayal. "She was lured," he insisted. "Groomed." Online, the detective sighed. "We get these cases. We notify the feds if there's credible evidence of trafficking or coercion, but we can't open a cross-border investigation without probable cause. Do you have a name? No, Bryce whispered. Just an initial, R, and a beach photo. The detective nodded, sympathetic but unmoved. I'll file it, but unless she contacts you or we receive a tip, there's not much more we can do. Later, outside in the parking lot, Bryce sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel like it could hold him upright. His daughter was gone. She had crossed an international border, and no one was going after her. Not the police, not the FBI, not anyone. The line had been drawn, not just on a map, but in accountability. If she'd been snatched from a shopping mall, there would have been an Amber Alert, helicopters, media. But crossing into Mexico of her own will, that moved her into a legal gray zone no one wanted to enter. He went home and sat in Olivia's room. The windows let in golden light, but the warmth didn't touch him. He remembered something from her childhood, how she used to ask him if birds ever got lost when they migrated. He'd told her, "They follow stars you can't see." Now, it felt like she'd flown into the dark, with no map. Bryce didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, her emails on the screen. He reread the beach message over and over. He stared at the photo, the beach in the background, and what looked like a cheap motel sign to the side. He reverse image searched the photo. No results. He opened Google Maps and began scanning every beachside road in Tijuana slowly, exhaustively, block by block. Morning came again, and he was still scrolling. He realized no one was coming to find her. No task force. No knock at the door with news. If he wanted her back, he would have to go get her himself. Not because he was trained, not because he had a plan, but because something ancient in him had woken. The same instinct that made birds fly thousands of miles. A father's compass. And it pointed south. Bryce had never been the kind of man to chase storms. He lived simply, solved problems with logic, avoided unnecessary risks. But logic hadn't helped him. Not with the police, not with the border. So he stopped thinking like an employee, or even a citizen, and started thinking like a father. He began his search at the margins, not in the official channels, but in the online spaces that existed quietly beneath them. Forums, subreddits, old message boards dedicated to missing persons. He lurked in threads where other desperate families posted blurry photos, last known addresses, and pleas for information that rarely got replies. In these quiet corners of the internet, he saw patterns emerging. Teen girls lured through social media, promises of love, adventure, modeling gigs, one-way bus tickets to border towns. Then, silence. Bryce read until his eyes ached. He took notes, names, nicknames, warnings. If they mention El Modelo, be worried. Watch for escort manager messages. If they say they're going to playas, they're probably headed to Zona Norte. He scrolled through archived threads about Tijuana, about how the border wall barely slowed foot traffic, about how a teenager with a fake story could easily cross, especially if no one was looking. And they weren't. No one was looking for Olivia except him. Bryce created a burner account and began asking questions carefully. He didn't want to scare people off. He presented himself as someone trying to help a friend's daughter. One user replied with advice: start with bus routes. Girls don't usually fly. Fresno to San Isidro, then they walk. Bryce checked Greyhound schedules. Sure enough, there had been 3 buses over the weekend that fit the timeline. All landed near the pedestrian border crossing. That was his first breadcrumb. From there, he traced possible motels. the low-budget kind that accepted cash, no questions asked. He saved their addresses. Then he started building a map. Pins, color-coded. He had no training, no detective background, just instinct and devotion. He printed Olivia's photo, a smiling, gap-toothed face, and carried it in his wallet. Not just as a reminder, but as proof. He also began collecting Spanish phrases, not the tourist ones, the ones people used in the shadows. Peligro, trata, desaparecida. He practiced them late at night, whispering them like prayers. Then, something clicked. In one of the forums, someone posted a blurry photo of a girl who looked startlingly like Olivia. She was standing near a taco stand, wearing a hoodie that looked too big for her. The caption read, "Saw her crying in Mexicali near Calechero. Might be American." It wasn't proof, but Bryce printed the photo anyway. Mexicali. That wasn't far. A couple of hours past Tijuana. The idea of heading into Mexico had always been abstract, a theoretical endpoint. But now it became real. He packed lightly, a change of clothes, Olivia's photo, cash and small bills, a used burner phone, and the courage he hadn't known he had. Before leaving, he wrote a letter and left it taped to the fridge, just in case. "If something happens to me, I went to find Olivia. Please don't stop looking for her. She's real. She's worth it." Then he drove south, past vineyards and farmland, through Los Angeles traffic, down to San Isidro. At the pedestrian crossing, he hesitated. The wall loomed beside him, metal and rust, cutting the sky like a scar. Beyond it, the streets of Tijuana waited, chaotic, foreign, alive. Bryce clutched the photo in his pocket. Then he stepped forward, into a country that did not know his name, into a city where hope could vanish as easily as a shadow. But he didn't pause again. Because somewhere beyond those narrow streets and crowded plazas, his daughter was waiting, and he would find her. Tijuana greeted Bryce not with menace, but with noise. Honking cars, shouting vendors, the heavy beat of music spilling from shops. It wasn't the darkness he had feared. It was chaos. Colors clashed. Conversations bled into one another. English and Spanish mingled mid-air like oil and water. Bryce stepped carefully onto Avenida Revolucion, clutching Olivia's photo in his jacket pocket. His backpack was light, his nerves heavier. The streets were crowded, yet he had never felt more alone. He found a small, cheap hotel with rusted railings and faded yellow paint. The woman at the front desk barely looked up. When he asked for a room in slow, nervous Spanish, she handed him a key without a word. The room had a flickering light, a fan that whined, and a bed that felt older than he was. But it was a place to anchor. He sat on the bed and unfolded the printed map he'd marked with highlighters and pen scratches. Tijuana wasn't big, but it was dense, a tangle of alleys, street markets, hidden corners. His leads were few: a beach photo, a possibly similar girl in Mexicali, and a suspicion that Olivia hadn't come here alone. He started walking. He carried Olivia's photo in a small folder, laminated, just in case it rained. He showed it to taco vendors, bus drivers, women standing near storefronts. "La ha visto?" he asked again and again. Some shook their heads. Some didn't answer. A few looked for a second longer, not with recognition, but with sympathy. That night, back at the hotel, Bryce lay awake listening to the street noise. Sirens, laughter, firecrackers, or something that sounded close to them. He couldn't sleep. So he opened Olivia's email again. R's last message. "It's going to be hot down here. Can't wait to show you the ocean." He searched for ocean view motels in Tijuana. Most were in playas, the western edge of the city. He circled a few. In the morning, he went west. Playas de Tijuana was calmer than downtown. There were joggers on the boardwalk, dogs off-leash in the sand, families, children. And just beyond the tide, the faint outline of the U.S. fence curving into the sea. Bryce asked again, photo in hand. This time, a woman behind a coffee cart paused. She didn't speak English, but when he showed her the photo, her expression changed. "No aquí," she said, frowning. "Pero, zona." She pointed east. "Zona norte." Zona norte. Bryce had heard that name before. He returned to his hotel and typed the name into his phone. The search results made his stomach turn. Bars, brothels, streets lined with glassy-eyed teens. A place tourists were told to avoid. A place girls disappeared into. It didn't make sense. Olivia wasn't like that. She was innocent, shy. But then he remembered the messages, the grooming, the Our Zona Norte, the name pressed against him like a wall. He closed his laptop, folded the photo back into his jacket, and promised himself, even if it broke him, he would go there. Because fathers didn't get to choose where the trail ended. They just followed it, even into places the world had already forgotten. Zona Norte didn't sleep. Bryce stood at the edge of it just after sunset, when the sky was still holding on to some blue, and the streetlights flickered on like warnings. The air smelled like sweat, smoke, and perfume that had turned sour in the heat. Music thudded from behind dark doorways. Women leaned into car windows. Young men smoked on curbs, eyes alert, faces unreadable. Bryce walked slowly, not trying to hide but not trying to stand out. He was too clean, too American, too clearly out of place. But he kept his head down and his focus forward. He carried Olivia's photo close to his chest. He stopped first at a taco stall run by an older man with tired eyes. Bryce pointed at the photo and asked softly, "La ha visto?" The man studied the image. Then a shrug. "Muchas niñas," he said. "Todas se parecen." Bryce nodded, forced a thank you, and moved on. He tried again at a small bodega, then again at a bar where a woman at the door wore plastic heels and tired makeup. Each time he repeated his question. Each time the same result. Until, near a narrow alley between two clubs, he found a man leaning against a post, smoking, middle-aged, worn jacket. Not a cop, but not invisible either. Bryce approached him slowly, showed the photo. "Por favor," he said. "Mi hija." The man squinted, then tilted his head. "Maybe," he muttered in accented English. "Maybe saw her last week. Blonde girl, alone?" Bryce's heart jumped. Yes, here?" The man hesitated. "Came in with skinny guy, tattoos, spoke English, stayed 2 days." He flicked his cigarette away, then gone. Bryce pressed, but the man shook his head. "Too many girls. Some stay, some vanish." The man gave him a name, a club called Luz Roja, Red Light. That was his next stop. Bryce didn't want to go in. The music inside throbbed with something he didn't understand, something desperate and loud. But he did. Inside, the room was red, literally, bathed in dim, sultry crimson lights. He moved past men slouched in booths and women dancing mechanically. At the bar, he asked a waitress if she'd seen the girl in the photo. She didn't answer at first, then leaned in and whispered, "You her dad?" Bryce blinked. "Yes." The woman exhaled slowly. "She was here 2 nights, looked scared, left with a guy, not from here." "Where?" Bryce asked. "Do you know where?" The woman hesitated. "Sometimes they go east, Mexicali, cheaper rooms, less cops." Bryce left with trembling hands. He stumbled into the night air and leaned against a wall, trying to slow his breathing. He was close. Closer than he'd been in days. She had been here. Had sat where he stood. Had looked afraid. He imagined her in that red-lit room, clutching her hoodie sleeves, trying to disappear into the shadows. Bryce closed his eyes. He couldn't save her from where she had been, but he could find her before it got worse. He returned to his hotel and booked a seat on the next bus to Mexicali. Before bed, he looked at her school photo again and whispered, "I'm coming, baby girl. Just hold on." The bus to Mexicali hummed steadily across the desert highway, its windows streaked with dust and the stale scent of plastic and old upholstery lingering in the air. Bryce sat near the back, eyes fixed on the endless blur of sand and brush beyond the glass. He hadn't spoken a word since boarding. Every jolt of the tires over uneven asphalt was a reminder. He was moving, inching closer. But so was time, slipping past him second by second, like grains of that very same desert. He reviewed everything in his head: the photo, the club, the girl who looked scared. He clutched a note he had scribbled on hotel paper. Mexicali, Calle, with a question mark. The street from the forum post, where someone thought they'd seen her. The bus arrived late afternoon. Mexicali was quieter than Tijuana. Less neon, more grit. The streets baked under the desert sun. Bryce stepped off into the blinding light, sweat forming beneath his shirt. He'd barely eaten, running on bottled water and urgency. He checked into a low-budget motel near the station. The desk clerk didn't ask questions, just handed over a room key without eye contact. The room had no curtains, just a sheet pinned over the window. No TV, no working light in the bathroom, but it would do. He washed his face in the sink and stared at his reflection. He looked different, tired, sharper. A man pulled forward by something heavier than fear. Outside, he walked to California. It wasn't a real street, more an unofficial strip of warehouses, abandoned buildings and makeshift shelters. He showed Olivia's photo again. To store clerks, a man sweeping the sidewalk, a woman selling tamales from a cart. Most didn't answer. Some just shook their heads. Then a boy, no older than 16, pointed. She maybe stayed there. He gestured toward a crumbling building with graffiti on every wall and windows covered by blankets. Bryce approached slowly. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was hot, thick with mildew and cigarette smoke. People moved like ghosts, too tired or too wary to care who entered. A woman sat on a mattress near the wall, smoking. Her eyes were wary but not unkind. Bryce showed her the photo. "Ella?" The woman looked at it long and hard, then gave a small nod. "See, she here. Few nights." Bryce's heart skipped. "Is she still?" The woman shook her head. "Number gone. With man. Loud voice. Said something about border." That word. Border. Bryce stepped outside and squinted toward the setting sun. The desert stretched out beyond Mexicali, golden and wide. The border to the U.S. was just a few miles away. But between here and there, nothing was simple. He walked back slowly, stopped at a payphone and made a single call to a burner number he'd found online. A local who helped with missing persons cases unofficially. A friend of someone he'd met in the Tijuana forum. A man picked up. Bryce explained the situation. There was a pause. Then, "Meet me in the morning, Plaza Cathedral. I know people who know the routes. We'll talk." That night, Bryce couldn't sleep. He sat by the window and watched the empty street. Somewhere out there, his daughter was still moving, with or without a plan, with or without hope. and tomorrow he would take another step toward her, even if it meant walking straight into the desert. The Plaza Cathedral woke with the slow rhythm of a desert morning. Vendors setting up their stands, birds calling above the cathedral dome, the smell of bread, dust, and gasoline mingling in the early light. Bryce arrived early. He wore the same jacket from San Diego, now creased and sun-bleached. The photo of Olivia stayed tucked against his chest, folded and unfolded so many times its corners had softened like fabric. The man from the phone call appeared 20 minutes later, lean, middle-aged, dark glasses. He didn't introduce himself, didn't shake hands. "Walk with me," he said. They moved through the plaza, past a fountain speckled with coins. "You're lucky," the man said quietly. "Most parents don't come this far, or they come too late." Bryce stayed silent. The man continued, "Girls like your daughter, they don't vanish. Not all at once. They move. Truck stops, border towns, sometimes back to the US, but through the wrong doors." He handed Bryce a small piece of paper. On it was a name, Elroy, and beneath it, Algodones. "Who's that?" Bryce asked. The man answered, "A coyote. Not the worst, not the best. But he moves girls, fast. If your daughter left Mexicali, she might have gone with him." "Where is Algodones?" "East, 45 minutes, border town. Nothing much there but dentists and back doors." Bryce looked down at the name. Elroy. It felt like a door creaking open. Just a sliver of light. The man added, "Be careful. You ask the wrong person about the right girl. People get nervous." Bryce thanked him. The man nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd. By noon, Bryce was on a borrowed bike, pedaling along the highway shoulder toward Algodones. The sun bore down, unrelenting. His skin burned through his shirt. But the road didn't stop, and neither did he. Algodones was unlike the places he'd passed through. Smaller, stranger, a town caught between countries where everything was temporary. Medical offices, hotels, even laws. He asked around again. No photo this time. He was told to keep that tucked away here. Just quiet words. A name, El Rey. Most denied knowing him. But a mechanic in a small auto shop tilted his head and motioned toward the back lot. "You want Elroy?" he said in English. "He drinks at La Mosca, around sunset." Bryce waited nearby until the light began to fade, then walked to the edge of town where the bar sat. Low ceiling, flickering sign, one door. Inside it smelled of old beer and tire rubber. And there he was. Elroy sat in the back, alone, his boots muddy and shirt unbuttoned. Tattoos crawled up both arms, but his eyes weren't cruel, just sharp. Bryce approached him slowly. "Are you Elroy?" The man looked up, cautious. "Depends. Who's asking?" "I'm looking for someone. A girl, 14, American, blonde. She may have come through here. Maybe with you." Elroy watched him a long time, then pointed to the seat across from him. "Sit down," he said. And Bryce did. The room grew quiet around them. A thin line of sweat traced Bryce's temple. Elroy leaned forward. "I don't move kids. Not unless they're desperate. Not unless they ask." Bryce swallowed. "Did she?" Elroy pulled a coin from his pocket and rolled it across the table. "She was here, maybe a week ago. Quiet. Didn't trust anyone. Asked me if I could get her across. I said no." Bryce's heart sank. "Why?" "She was scared, but not ready to run. Said she was looking for someone, a guy. Maybe the one who brought her." Bryce stiffened. "Was she with him?" Number said he left her, took her phone, took her cash. She was on her own. Bryce sat in silence. "She say where she was going?" Elroy nodded once. She asked about San Luis. She heard he might be there. A club. Something called El Desierto Azul. Another place. Another step. Elroy stood up. That's all I got, Padre. But if she's looking for him, he won't stay still long. Bryce stood too, nodding his thanks. As he stepped back into the night, the desert wind kicked dust into his face. He closed his eyes, pressed Olivia's photo to his chest once more. She was close, not safe, not found, but close. And that was enough to keep going. The road to San Luis Rio, Colorado was long, flat, and quiet. A ribbon of dust and determination stretching across the Sonoran desert. Bryce hitched a ride with a truck driver who barely spoke. They didn't exchange names, just silence and motion. The sun rode with them the whole way, beating down like a silent clock. When they reached the edge of town, Bryce stepped out into a haze of dry heat and sand-colored buildings. San Luis was a border city like the others, temporary and tired. But something about it felt heavier. He walked for hours, searching without knowing exactly what to look for. Desierto Azul, he repeated under his breath over and over. The blue desert. It sounded like a myth, a mirage. He asked in gas stations, corner stores, taquerias. Most shook their heads. Some looked away. But then outside a pawn shop, an older woman sweeping the front stoop paused when he asked. El Desierto Azul, she said, thinking. Yes, back of town. Not a place for good things. Bryce thanked her and walked on. The club wasn't marked with a sign, just a cracked blue door in a half-collapsed building at the edge of an old industrial lot. A single porch light buzzed above it, even in daylight. He stood outside for a long time, listening. Then he pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick, with incense, cigarette smoke, maybe something else. A slow song played on warped speakers. There were booths and shadows, girls on a stage, barely moving, a bartender with eyes that didn't blink. Bryce approached him, held out Olivia's photo. The man took a drag from his cigarette, looked down at the picture, and then squinted. She was here, he said, his voice rough. 5-6 days ago. Looked young, wouldn't give a name. Bryce's throat tightened. Was she alone? The man nodded. Most of the time. Sometimes talked to an older woman. Name was Lupe. Kinda took her in. Where is she now? The bartender shrugged. Lupe left 2 days ago. Took the girl, maybe. Nobody's seen either since. Bryce pressed harder, voice barely steady. Do you know where they went? Word was they were heading for Sonoita, back route to Arizona. Lupe knew the hills. The bartender leaned closer. But if the girl's running from someone, they'll be watching those roads too. Bryce stepped back into the sunlight. It was hotter now, the air shimmering. He found a cafe with a working phone and called the man from Mexicali again. Told him about Lupe, about Sonoita. There was a long pause. I know someone in Sonoita, the man said finally. I'll call him. He'll watch for her. But you need to get there fast. That area's not safe. It's all foot traffic, no patrol. Bryce didn't wait. He bartered for a ride with a young couple heading east. Sat in the back seat holding Olivia's photo, replaying every detail. Lupe, an older woman, someone who maybe helped. He didn't know if he could trust that hope, but it was all he had. The drive was quiet, dust rising behind them like a ghost trail. By evening, they arrived in Sonoita, a town smaller, rougher, fewer places to hide. Bryce checked into a motel that barely qualified as one, a shack with peeling paint and a sink that didn't work. He spent the night walking the nearby streets, showing the photo, saying her name. Nothing. Until, at a corner food stand, a child pointed to the photo. Ella estaba con señora, he said. Tenía una bolsa grande. Caminaban al monte. She had been with an older woman. They were walking into the hills, toward the desert, toward the border. Bryce looked east, where the land rose slowly into jagged rock and sunburned brush. She was walking, running, somewhere out there. And tomorrow, he would follow. The sun had barely risen when Bryce stepped out into the cold morning air of Sonoita. The desert looked different at dawn, less cruel, almost still. The colors muted, but the silence loud, as if everything was waiting. He'd packed a small bag, water, crackers, a flashlight, and Olivia's photo, now soft as cloth from use. He found a guide at the edge of town, a man named Mateo who helped people cross, not smugglers, but those looking for lost ones, lost things. Mateo didn't ask questions, but his eyes said he understood. The woman, Bryce said, Lupe, with a girl, maybe 14. They were walking east. Can you help me find them? Mateo nodded. I can take you part way, but the trail splits. After that, you follow the signs. Clothing, footprints. Look for bottles. That's how they survive out there. They set off before the sun cleared the hills. The desert was quiet, but not empty. Cacti stretched like statues. Small animals darted between rocks. Everything was colorless, cracked, but alive. Bryce walked for hours. Mateo pointed to flattened brush, a dropped wrapper. Someone passed here not long ago. Then to the left, a piece of fabric caught on a bush. Blue, faded. See, Mateo said. They were here. At a shallow ravine, Mateo stopped. I go no further. This is coyote ground now, dangerous. But she went that way, I believe. Bryce nodded. Thank you. He continued alone. Each step felt heavier. The sun climbed. The air turned sharp with heat. He drank slowly, sparingly. Then, halfway up a dry slope, he found something. A scarf, pink, frayed at the ends. He picked it up gently, turned it over in his hands. It was Olivia's. He remembered it from the photo, just a corner showing beneath her jacket. He dropped to his knees. She had been here, maybe hours ago, and she had dropped this, or left it. He stood, scanned the hill, saw a set of prints, light, small, alongside heavier ones. He followed. The wind kicked sand into his eyes. His legs ached, but the prints led him, winding between boulders and brush. Then he saw a water bottle, half full, resting against a stone in the shade. Next to it, a crumpled food wrapper. He was close. So close it hurt. The path curved again. The sun was dropping now, and shadows stretched long and thin. Then, over the rise, voices. He ducked low, moved slowly, and saw them. Two figures. One standing, watching the horizon. One sitting, arms around knees. The girl's blonde hair caught the last of the sun. He froze. Time folded. He stepped forward, cautiously. Dust kicked beneath his shoes. The woman turned first. Older, strong shoulders. A face weathered by sun and care. Then the girl turned too. Her face thinner, older than he remembered. But it was her. Olivia. Their eyes met across the silence. She stood slowly. Dad? He didn't speak, just nodded, then walked forward. She ran into his arms, no words. Just the sound of breathing, of a heart breaking and mending at once. The woman, Lupe, stood back, watching. Her eyes shining, but her face still. Bryce whispered, You're okay now. You're safe. Olivia clutched his shirt. I didn't know if you'd come. I never stopped. The wind rose softly through the brush. The desert, vast and endless, held them like a cradle. But they weren't done. The way home was still ahead. They camped there that night. The three of them, Bryce, Olivia, and Lupe, sheltered beneath an outcrop of rock where the wind curled like a whisper and stars gathered slowly in the darkening sky. Bryce didn't ask many questions, not yet. Instead, he watched his daughter sleep, curled close, face pressed against his chest like she had as a child. Her breathing was shallow, tired, her body thin. But her fingers held his shirt tightly, as if to make sure he wouldn't vanish with the morning. Lupe sat nearby, wrapped in a woven shawl. She looked out across the desert with an expression Bryce couldn't quite name, something between exhaustion and defiance. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. She was lucky. Bryce didn't respond right away, just followed her eyes to the distance. She could have ended up anywhere, Lupe continued. I saw her in San Luis, just sitting outside that club, not crying, just looking, like she didn't know where she was or what came next. She didn't, Bryce said, his voice rough. She called me once. I missed it. Lupe nodded. I've seen what happens to girls like her when nobody comes. Bryce looked at her then. Why did you help her? The wind lifted Lupe's shawl slightly. She didn't answer for a moment. Because someone helped my daughter once, when I couldn't. She's gone now, but that kindness, it stayed. Bryce nodded. I owe you everything. Lupe looked at him, eyes sharp. You owe her the truth. Not just a ride home, not just safety. The truth. About who left her behind and who brought her back. Bryce glanced down at Olivia, asleep now, lips parted slightly, a cut on her cheek nearly healed. I will, he said. Morning came slowly. They walked back west, retracing the path that had once been desperation and now was hope. They stopped briefly in Sonoita to rest. Lupe arranged a call to the man in Mexicali, who confirmed a safe contact in Nogales, someone who could help them re-enter Arizona without legal entanglement. No border patrol, no fingerprints, he said. It's better this way, cleaner. Lupe didn't stay long after that. She gave Olivia a small silver pendant, a saint worn smooth with time. For protection, she said softly. Olivia whispered thank you, hugging her tightly. Lupe turned to Bryce. Be careful. You came into this country without permission. You're leaving with someone even more fragile. Bryce looked at her. How can I repay you? You just did, she said. You found her. And then Lupe walked away, disappearing into the streets as quietly as she had come into their lives. Bryce and Olivia rested in a room above a pharmacy, clean, safe, with bars on the window and a fan that hummed like a lullaby. That night, as they lay in twin beds across from each other, Olivia spoke for the first time about what had happened. He said we'd be fine, she whispered, that he knew people, that it'd be easy to come back. But once we crossed, he changed. Bryce didn't interrupt. He took my phone, sold it maybe, said I was too noticeable. Then he left, just one night, gone. I waited 2 days at a bus stop, then walked. Bryce felt a burn behind his eyes, but he held it down. I didn't know how to get back. I thought about turning myself in, but I was scared they'd send me somewhere worse. You were so brave, Bryce said, voice breaking slightly. Braver than I'll ever be. I just kept walking, she said, until Lupe found me. They lay in silence. Then Olivia whispered, I thought maybe you didn't want me back. Bryce sat up, crossed the room, and knelt by her bed. I would have walked to the end of the earth for you, he said. And I almost did, She reached for his hand, and in that small gesture, the ache of miles and days and silence began to loosen. They would go home soon, but first, they would rest and begin to breathe again. They left Sonoita before dawn. The man in Mexicali had arranged for a guide to meet them near a quiet stretch of the desert border. Not a crossing point marked by signs or guards, but a place where shadows passed in silence and footprints faded quickly with the wind. Bryce and Olivia rode in the back of an old pickup with 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all quiet, all carrying stories they didn't tell. Olivia leaned against him, a hood pulled over her hair, her face pale in the early light. The guide was young, no more than 25. His name was Julio, and he drove without music, without conversation, just the drone of tires and the occasional cough of dust. They reached the edge of a dry riverbed around noon. Julio killed the engine and turned in his seat. "From here, we walk." Bryce nodded. "How far?" 4 miles, maybe 5, but slow, careful. Border Patrol has sensors, drones. We don't touch the fence, we go beneath." "Beneath?" Julio pointed toward a concrete culvert, half covered with brush. "Drainage path. Most don't know it's still open." They climbed out. The other travelers moved quickly, like they had done this before. Bryce helped Olivia down. Her ankle was sore from days of walking, but she didn't complain. She gripped his hand tightly. They entered the culvert single file. It smelled of old water and rust, the ceiling low enough to stoop. Julio carried a flashlight. Every so often he stopped to listen. Once they heard voices above, distant, crackling radios. Olivia froze. Bryce placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "They don't know we're here." Eventually, the tunnel narrowed, then widened again. Ahead, the light shifted, and then a trickle of sunlight at the far end. Julio stepped into it and turned back. "This is it. 10 more steps and you're in Arizona." Bryce hesitated. So close now. So strange that crossing a line could mean freedom. He took Olivia's hand. Together they stepped into the light. The sun on the other side felt different, sharper, cleaner. Julio handed Bryce a small envelope. "There's a man waiting at the gas station 2 miles north. He has IDs, clothes, no questions. Just say the word Roadrunner." Bryce nodded. "Thank you." Julio turned and disappeared back into the tunnel. They walked the last stretch alone. The landscape was empty. Scrub brush, rocks, power lines in the distance. Bryce felt exposed, not just to patrols, but to time, to the weight of all they'd just passed through. At the gas station, an older man stood beside a beat-up sedan. He wore a baseball cap and mirrored sunglasses, said nothing. Bryce walked up slowly. "Roadrunner." The man nodded once, opened the trunk. Inside were 2 backpacks, clean clothes, bottles of water. He tossed the keys to Bryce. "Tank's full. Drive north. Don't stop until Phoenix." He got into another car and drove away without another word. Bryce stood there for a moment, hands on the keys, unsure if any of this was real. Then Olivia spoke softly. "Let's go home." They changed clothes in the restroom. Bryce shaved. Olivia brushed her hair. When they looked at each other in the mirror, it was like seeing ghosts who had found their bodies again. The drive was long, but quiet. They passed through towns and open spaces, through places Bryce had never seen, and yet, every mile felt like returning. In Phoenix, they stopped at a motel. Bryce called the friend who'd been checking his apartment. It was untouched. No police, no questions. "I told them you were visiting family," the friend said. "No one came looking." That night, as Olivia slept, Bryce stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The same stars as in the desert. But here they felt softer somehow, less lonely. He thought of Lupe, of Julio, of the people who moved through shadows to do what laws could not. And he thought of the road still ahead, not the miles, but the healing, the conversations, the work of rebuilding trust with a daughter he had nearly lost forever. Inside, Olivia stirred. Bryce walked back in, gently closing the door behind him. He sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, and whispered the words he would say again and again. "I've got you." The morning after they reached Phoenix, Bryce woke early. He sat in the corner of the motel room, a styrofoam cup of burnt coffee in his hands, watching Olivia sleep under the dim hum of the ceiling fan. He was home, technically, but nothing felt settled. Their return wasn't the kind that brought relief, not yet. It was a fragile kind of arrival. A pause before the next weight fell. When Olivia stirred and opened her eyes, he smiled softly. "We'll head back today," he said. "Take it slow, just a few more hours." She nodded, her face expressionless. She'd hardly spoken since the crossing. The relief of reunion had given way to something quieter, exhaustion perhaps, or the dull weight of all she'd left behind. They loaded into the car and began driving west toward California, past the cracked plains, past the stretch of border towns, anonymous in the rearview mirror. Bryce kept the music low, some old tune Olivia used to hum as a kid. She didn't sing this time, but she didn't turn it off either. As the highway opened up, Bryce found himself glancing at her often. Her eyes stayed on the window, the landscape sliding by like something she didn't trust yet. "You can sleep if you want," he said gently. "I'm not tired," she murmured. But she looked tired, deeply, in her bones. They crossed into California by mid-afternoon. The moment passed without fanfare. No checkpoints, no signs of resistance, just an invisible line, and the knowledge that they were now within a system that might start asking questions. Bryce's apartment hadn't changed. Same creaky floorboard by the entrance, same water stain on the ceiling. But the space felt smaller now, like it had shrunk in their absence. He unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Olivia in first. She stood in the living room for a long moment, as if trying to recognize something that no longer felt familiar. "I thought it'd be different," she said softly. "It is," he said. They unpacked little, just enough for her to have clean clothes, a place to rest. Bryce made dinner, soup from a can and toast. Olivia picked at it, then pushed the bowl away. "Can I take a bath?" she asked. He nodded. "Of course. Towels are in the closet." As the water ran, he sat in the kitchen, fingers tapping lightly against the table. The silence of the apartment was sharp, too sharp. She stayed in the bathroom for almost an hour. When she emerged, she was wrapped in an old robe of his, sleeves too long, her wet hair clinging to her neck. He looked up. "Better?" "A little." They watched a movie together, but neither remembered what it was. When it ended, she asked, "Do I have to go back to school?" Bryce hesitated. "Not right away. We'll figure things out. Maybe counseling first." "I don't want to talk to anyone." "You don't have to. Not until you're ready." She nodded. Then quietly, "They won't understand anyway." He didn't disagree. As the days passed, a quiet rhythm settled in. They didn't speak much, but they were near each other, in the same rooms, moving carefully around a new silence. Bryce called a therapist he trusted, made an appointment for himself first. He didn't tell Olivia yet. But he needed to talk, to unpack the ache that hadn't left his chest since she vanished. The guilt, the rage, the helplessness. At night, he heard her whispering in her sleep, sometimes crying. He never woke her, but he stayed near. One evening, as the sky turned violet, she sat beside him on the fire escape. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said without looking at him. His throat closed, but he nodded. "I kept telling myself you were coming, even when I stopped believing it." "I never stopped searching," he said. "Not for a second." She turned to him, eyes red. Why didn't they help? The police, the government, anyone. "Because the system isn't built for girls like you," he said. "Not when the borders get in the way." "That's messed up." "It is." She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat in silence as the lights came on across the city, and for the first time in weeks, something small and sacred returned. A breath shared, a night not survived, but lived. A week passed, then two. Time stretched in unusual ways in the quiet aftermath. Bryce kept the apartment still. No visitors, no noise, no unexpected movements. Olivia needed space, even if she couldn't name it, and he gave it freely. But healing doesn't come with silence alone. One morning, Olivia stood in the doorway of his room, arms crossed, hair still damp from a shower. "I want to know everything," she said. Bryce set down his coffee. "About what?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "About what you did, after I left, about how you found me?" Bryce nodded slowly. "Okay." He pulled out a chair for her at the kitchen table. They sat across from one another, steam rising gently from the mugs between them, and he began to tell her. He told her about the night he realized she was gone, the hours on the phone, the police reports, the moments when no one believed he had a case at all, when they called her a runaway, when they told him he couldn't press charges. He spoke slowly, clearly. No theatrics. She listened, unmoving, except for her fingers tapping the ceramic edge of her cup. He told her about the maps, the border, about walking into Nogales. Then further, the heat, the hunger, the fear. He paused when he got to Lupe. "She found you before I could," he said, "and she protected you like you were her own." Olivia was quiet a moment. "I remember her face." "She saved both of us," he continued. "The shelters, the shadows, the tunnel, Julio, the man with the fake IDs. Finally, he stopped. They sat there in the hush of morning, everything between them laid bare. "You really did all that?" she asked softly. "I would have done more," he said, "if I had to." She reached out, hand shaking slightly, and touched his knuckles. "I thought you'd hate me." Bryce's breath caught. "Never. I thought you wouldn't come. I never stopped walking." She looked down, tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. "I feel like I'm still there, like I haven't come back yet." He nodded. "That's okay. We'll come back together." She stayed there at the table for a long time, not talking, just being, and he let the silence wrap around them. Later that day, Olivia asked if she could visit her old room. It had been untouched. Bryce couldn't bring himself to pack it away. He had left everything exactly as she had. Books, posters, even the half-finished sketch on the desk. When she stepped in, her breath caught. "It smells the same," she said. She touched the dresser, then the bedspread, sat on the floor beside the nightstand. Then she whispered, "I'm not that girl anymore." Bryce sat beside her. "You're not, but you're still you." She didn't answer, just stared at the photos taped to the wall. A version of herself smiling with friends, with braces and painted nails and no idea what the next year would bring. She turned to him. "Can I start over?" He smiled gently. "That's what home is for." They started to talk more after that. Not everything, and not all at once. But the wall between them thinned. Bryce found a local support group. Not for Olivia, but for parents. He went once a week, sat in a circle of strangers, told his story. "I couldn't wait for someone to save her," he said once. "So I went myself." The room fell silent. Then someone else nodded. That was all he needed. He didn't tell Olivia everything he said there, but she noticed the difference. His shoulders less tense, his eyes more open. And one night, as she flipped through an old sketchbook, she asked him quietly, "Do you think I could draw it?" "What do you mean?" "Everything. Mexico, the journey. Maybe not like a diary, but like pieces of it. Shapes I can understand." "I think that's a beautiful idea." She looked up. "Even the bad parts?" He nodded. "Especially the bad parts." That night, she drew until the early morning. Bold lines, broken edges, eyes in the margins. Things she couldn't yet say aloud. And Bryce sat nearby, reading, present but not hovering. This was how they healed. Together, but slowly. Quietly, but with purpose. Piece by piece. The days began to feel ordinary again, though nothing about their lives could truly return to what they were before. And perhaps that was the point. Some mornings, Olivia joined Bryce on the fire escape, sipping weak coffee she'd learned to tolerate, her sketchbook in hand. Other times, she stayed in her room, headphones on, the pencil scratching a soft rhythm into the paper. One Thursday afternoon, she asked, "Can I visit Mom?" Bryce looked up from the dish rack. "You sure?" She nodded. "I need to tell her I'm okay. She needs to see me." He made the call. Olivia's mother, Maya, answered on the second ring. Her voice caught when she heard Olivia was home. There was a pause, followed by a whispered thank you, though neither Bryce nor Maya could quite say to whom. They met at a neutral place, a small public park in the late afternoon sun. Maya stood waiting under a tree, her arms crossed tightly, as if bracing for a wave. Olivia walked toward her, slow but steady. Maya's hands rose instinctively, then dropped. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she said first. "I should have known. I should have seen something." Olivia nodded but didn't speak. There were no dramatic embraces, no raised voices, just two people learning how to stand near each other again. Bryce kept his distance, letting them have the moment. He sat on a bench nearby, watching ducks float across the pond. The quiet lapping of water sounded more real than anything else around him. When Olivia returned to him, she looked lighter. "I'm glad I went," she said. "I think she is too." At home, the rhythm continued. Olivia signed up for online school. Flexible, quiet, safe. She didn't want crowded hallways or fluorescent lights. Not yet. Maybe never. Bryce supported it. He had learned to stop asking why and to start asking how. How do we move forward? How do we hold space for what's been lived? One evening, Olivia showed him a series of sketches. "This is the tunnel," she said, pointing to a dark swirl with tiny lights near the top. "This one's Lupe. A strong line, a face both sharp and kind. And this," she hesitated, turning the page. "This is you." Bryce stared at the drawing. It was a man half in shadow, half lit by flame, one hand reaching forward, the other gripping something unseen. "I didn't know how to draw courage," she said, "so I drew what it felt like." He looked at her, speechless. "Is it okay?" "It's more than okay," he whispered. She placed the book down. "I think I want to show these someday, like publicly. Maybe help other girls, the ones who don't know how to talk about it yet." Bryce's chest tightened, that familiar mix of awe and ache. "You think you're ready?" he asked gently. "Not yet, but maybe soon." She looked at him then, eyes clear. "I didn't think I'd survive," she said, "but I did. And now, I want to help someone else survive too." He reached out and took her hand. "You already are." Fall crept in quietly, the air sharper in the mornings. School notices began arriving again. Doctor check-ins, counseling options. Life slowly was returning to structure, but neither Bryce nor Olivia rushed toward it. They understood now that the world wouldn't wait for them to be ready. But that didn't mean they had to move at its pace. One day at a time, one conversation, one breath. It was Olivia who said it first. "Maybe the miracle isn't that you found me. It's that I was ready to be found." Bryce nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "And I never stopped looking." By November, the edges of their new life began to hold shape. Olivia had established a routine, not always predictable but steady in its own quiet way. Mornings were for schoolwork, afternoons for sketching or long walks around the neighborhood. Evenings, she often cooked simple meals, testing recipes from a worn vegetarian cookbook Bryce had once bought on a whim. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, she said, "You know what's weird? I remember the sound of that shelter more than the people." Bryce looked over. "The sound?" "Yeah, like old fans spinning, footsteps echoing on tile, a dog barking somewhere far off. I don't even know if there was a dog." She scrubbed a plate with more force than necessary, then placed it gently on the rack. "I guess the memories stick to the edges," she added, "not the center." Bryce dried a bowl and nodded slowly. "Maybe that's where healing starts too, around the edges." That night, she dreamed again. But this time, she didn't cry out. She woke just before dawn, sat on the fire escape wrapped in a blanket, sketchbook in her lap. When Bryce found her, she was drawing herself, standing in a border town, half-shadowed, but facing the sunrise. He didn't say anything, just poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her. "Do you think I'll always be that girl?" she asked, not looking up. "The one who got lost?" Bryce asked gently. She shook her head. "The one who had to be rescued?" He thought about that. "No," he said at last. "I think you'll always be the girl who found her way back, however it happened." She let out a long breath. Later that day, Bryce received a call from the local newspaper. A reporter had heard about a father who crossed the border alone to find his missing daughter. Someone, maybe from the support group, had passed on a version of the story. "I'm not looking for attention," Bryce said carefully. The reporter understood. "I just thought others might need to hear it, especially the part where you didn't give up." He promised to think about it. He told Olivia that evening. She didn't say no, but she didn't say yes either. "I don't know if I want people looking at me like a headline," she said. "You wouldn't be," Bryce said. "It's not about what happened to you. It's about what we did, about refusing to let go." She sat with that a long time. Then she asked, "Could I tell it in pictures instead?" "Absolutely." Over the next few weeks, she began assembling a small gallery of sketches. Not a full story, but moments. Border lights, a woman's protective hand, a father crossing an endless stretch of sand. She wrote no captions. They didn't need any. One afternoon, a woman from a local community center reached out. She had heard from the same reporter. We run trauma workshops for teens. I was wondering, would Olivia ever be interested in visiting? No pressure, just maybe sharing her art someday? Bryce passed the message along. Olivia stared at it for a long time, then quietly, maybe. Not now, but maybe. Bryce didn't push. He simply told her, whenever you're ready. They were walking side by side more now, in every sense. There were still quiet days, still moments where her gaze drifted far off and didn't return for hours. Still nights where Bryce woke and checked to see her light on, a quiet drawing in progress. But there was a steadiness in the sorrow now, like a coastline shaped by storms, but no longer swallowed by them. One weekend, Bryce took her out to the coast. I figured we earned a break, he said. They drove in silence, the radio humming old soul music in the background. At the cliff's edge, they stood looking out at the Pacific, the wind catching their clothes, the sea roaring like something ancient and vast. It's strange, Olivia whispered. I used to think I'd never see this again. Bryce looked at her, standing strong, eyes steady on the horizon. Me too, he said. They didn't need to say more. The waves crashed below, infinite and wide. And somewhere in that endless blue, a part of them settled, not erased, not forgotten, but carried forward, like driftwood to shore. Thanksgiving came quietly that year. There were no guests, no big dinners, no crowded kitchens, just Bryce, Olivia, and a small roasted chicken. Because Olivia didn't like turkey, and Bryce never learned how to cook it properly. They lit a candle, shared a toast with ginger ale, and for the first time in months, they laughed without looking over their shoulders. I think this is the first meal I've eaten that didn't taste like a memory, Olivia said, smiling faintly. Bryce smiled back. You always had a poet's tongue. She shrugged. Maybe, or maybe I'm just learning how to speak again. Later that night, Bryce brought out an old shoebox filled with photographs. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were snapshots from Olivia's early childhood. Camping trips, snow days, messy birthday cakes. They sat on the floor, passing each photo back and forth like a quiet conversation. Who's this? She asked, holding up a picture of Bryce in oversized sunglasses, holding her as a toddler on a beach. That's me trying to look cool while carrying 20 pounds of sunscreen and sand toys. She laughed. Then her face softened. I don't remember that day. That's okay, he said. I remember enough for both of us. A stillness passed between them, not empty, just full in its own quiet way. After a while, Olivia said, I want to take new photos. Bryce raised an eyebrow. Like with a camera? Yeah, she nodded. I want to document things now. Not because I'm afraid of forgetting, but because I want to remember. He squeezed her shoulder. Then let's get you a camera. That weekend, they visited a thrift shop downtown. Bryce expected her to gravitate toward the shiny digital models, but instead, she picked up an old 35mm film camera. It feels like it has a story, she said. Back home, she wandered around the neighborhood, capturing the texture of sidewalks, the way the light hit tree branches, reflections in puddles. Her photos were quiet, like her sketches, but they held something else too, a pulse, a memory in motion. She began to pair her images with fragments of writing, not full stories, just moments. I remember the way the light bent through the shelter window. Cool, this is what the wind sounded like the day I left home. This is how my father stood when he found me. Bryce watched this unfold with a kind of awe he didn't have words for. It was as if Olivia had cracked open a door within herself, not wide, but just enough to let others in. One day she asked him to take a portrait of her. "Not smiling, just me," she said. He held the camera steady as she stood against a white wall, arms loose at her sides, chin slightly raised. Click. She nodded. "That's the one." They developed it in the community center darkroom, a quiet place run by volunteers. As the image appeared, Olivia stared at her own face for a long time. "I don't recognize her," she said. "That's okay," Bryce replied. "She's new." They printed it and framed it, not for display, but for the small corner of her room where she now kept her sketchbooks and journals. The girl in the photo didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. She looked real, whole, beginning again. It was around this time that the community center followed up. "We're planning a small youth art night," the woman said over the phone. "Just local teens sharing work, no pressure. Olivia can come just to watch if she wants." When Bryce told her, she sat in silence a long time. Then, without looking up, she said, "I think I want to show something." He blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "Yeah, but I don't want to talk. Just show. Let the work speak." They chose 3 pieces, a sketch of the tunnel, a photo of a cracked window, and the portrait Bryce had taken. On the night of the event, the gallery buzzed with voices and nervous laughter. Teens stood near their work, parents hovering respectfully nearby. Olivia didn't hover. She stood back, arms crossed, watching people drift toward her section. Some tilted their heads. Some whispered. One girl even started crying. Bryce watched from across the room, his heart full and quiet. When the event ended, a boy her age walked up to her and said, "Hey, that one, with the lights in the dark. I felt that." She nodded. "Thanks." They didn't say more, but the message had landed. Back home that night, Olivia crawled into bed and whispered, "That was good." Bryce turned off the light. "You were brave. I think I was just ready." Outside, the city pulsed softly. Inside, a girl slept soundly. Winter arrived slowly in California, not with snow or sharp frost, but with a gentler hush. The days shortened, and the air carried a sharper chill. Trees along their block shed leaves like quiet confessions, and Bryce found himself waking earlier, watching the gray light filter into their apartment with a kind of reverence. Olivia's sketchbooks were now stacked high, each one labeled by month. Her camera, always slung across her shoulder, had become part of her silhouette. She moved differently now, not like someone avoiding the world, but someone beginning to claim space in it again. One Saturday morning, she surprised Bryce by suggesting they visit the border. "Not to go over," she clarified. "Just to see it. From our side." Bryce hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's a line that changed everything. I think I want to look at it without fear." They made the drive south in silence. The landscape opened up, stretching out into brown hills and sharp sun. The closer they got, the more Bryce's stomach tightened. But Olivia seemed calm, watchful, almost steady. They parked at a public overlook, a quiet spot where you could see the border wall weaving like a scar across the land. Children played nearby. Vendors sold snacks and painted miniatures. The ordinary collided with the symbolic. Olivia lifted her camera. Click, click. "Do you remember where you crossed?" she asked. "Not exactly," Bryce said, "but close to here." She nodded. "It's strange. I thought seeing it would make me panic, but it doesn't. It just exists. It's not a monster. It's just metal." He looked at her, wondering again at her strength, not loud or defiant, but deep, like a stone underwater. They sat for a while, watching shadows crawl across the wall. "I think I needed to see this," she said, "to remind myself that it didn't win." Back in the car, she scrolled through her photos. One caught her attention, the sunlight hitting the bars of the wall at a perfect slant, casting long, golden shadows. "This one feels honest," she murmured. The next week, she submitted it to a local youth photography competition. She didn't tell Bryce until she received an email saying she'd been selected for exhibition. "I didn't think it would matter," she said, "but now it kind of does." He laughed softly. "Everything you do matters, kiddo." The exhibit was held in a library gallery space. It was small but thoughtfully curated. Olivia's photo hung near the center, simple, stark, and quietly powerful. Visitors moved slowly from piece to piece, some stopping longer than others. Bryce stood near the back, watching people's reactions rather than the art itself. One woman touched her heart after reading Olivia's short caption, "A wall that could not stop hope." The next morning, Olivia received an invitation to participate in a youth storytelling project, a partnership between local artists and students with lived experience of trauma. "It's just a meeting," she told Bryce. "I'm not saying yes." But she went, and when she came home, there was something different in her walk. "I think I want to do it," she said, "but I want to control how the story is told. I don't want them to use big words like survivor or victim. I want it to be about choices, about coming back." Bryce listened carefully, as he always did. "Then make it yours." Together, they mapped out what she wanted to share, a combination of images, drawings, and a short monologue she would record in her own voice. The monologue was simple. "I crossed a border, I came back, and I'm still learning how to stand." Her voice cracked on the last sentence during the first few recordings, but by the third take, it held steady, clear, true. The showcase took place in a local theater. The stage transformed into a mosaic of stories, light, sound, image. Olivia's piece played midway through the evening. Bryce sat in the third row, his hands clenched together, his heart thudding in rhythm with her voice. When her segment ended, there was silence, then applause. Slow, sincere, rising like a tide. Afterward, strangers approached her. Teens, parents, teachers, each with their own words of thanks or connection. Olivia listened, responded quietly, and stood with an openness that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Driving home, she stared out the window. "I'm not who I was," she said. "No," Bryce agreed. "You're more." She looked at him, eyes shining in the dark. "Thank you for finding me." He gripped the wheel tighter. "Thank you for letting me." Outside, the city moved as always. Lights flickering, people walking, lives unfolding. But inside that car, for a brief, quiet stretch, time stilled. Just a father and daughter, carried forward by the road, by memory, and by something even deeper than love. The shared act of coming home. The new year came with rain, soft, persistent, the kind that draped the city in quiet. Water ran in delicate rivulets down windows, and Olivia took to photographing reflections in puddles, glass, and bus stops. "There's something about how the world looks when it's blurred," she said one day. "Like it's honest, but gentler." Bryce had started keeping a journal of his own, though he didn't write in it often. Just a line or two every few days. Things like, "She laughed again today," or "She bought herself a yellow umbrella." It helped him mark the passing of their new life, which felt less like escape now and more like growth. One morning, Olivia asked if they could visit the shelter where she'd been held. The legal proceedings around that place had long since wrapped up. A few arrests, a lot of bureaucracy, and not nearly enough justice. But the building still stood, vacant and slowly decaying. "Are you sure?" Bryce asked carefully. "I need to see it," she said. "Not to remember, to reclaim it." They drove in silence. The roads shimmered from the recent rain. Olivia wore her camera like armor. The shelter was surrounded by a chain-link fence now. Windows boarded up. A stray dog wandered nearby, tail low, eyes sharp. They stood there for a long while. "It looks so small," Olivia said quietly. "I thought it was endless when I was inside." She took one photo, just one, of the broken entrance with its fading sign. Then she tucked her camera away. "I'm done," she whispered. Not in bitterness, not in fear, in release. They walked back to the car, mud caking their shoes, silence carrying more weight than words. That afternoon, Olivia edited the photo in black and white, printed it, and placed it at the end of one of her sketchbooks. On the back, she wrote just 2 words: "I left." Spring crept in slowly after that. Green shoots along sidewalks, the scent of jasmine on street corners, and in their apartment, new light filtered in differently, somehow gentler now. One day, Bryce came home to find Olivia on the floor, surrounded by prints, books, and audio equipment. "I think I'm going to make a zine," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "A what now?" "A little book," she smiled. "Images, drawings, quotes, maybe parts of the monologue. Something I can hand out to kids like me. Kids who are in between." He sat beside her. "You're amazing, you know." She rolled her eyes, but she didn't refute it. They worked on it together over the next few weeks, not as father and daughter, but as collaborators. She selected the pieces, he helped with layout. They argued over fonts, laughed over typos, and one night stayed up past 2 a.m. just trying to decide on a cover. They called it The Border Inside. It wasn't about geography, not really. It was about crossing from silence to voice, from fear to art, from loss to return. She printed the first batch at a local print shop, 60 copies, each one folded by hand, bound with a thin cord. On the back cover, it simply said, "Created by Olivia Weiner." She mailed the first few copies to the community center, then to the shelter for youth survivors, one to the gallery that had hosted her photo, and one, just one, to the reporter who'd first called months ago. No fanfare, no social media, just paper and story and the slow work of letting something fly. That evening, she placed a copy on the kitchen table. "For you," she said. Bryce opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. He paused at the final spread, a photo of them together, side by side, backs turned, walking down a dirt path that seemed to stretch forever. "You put us in here. You were always part of the story," she said. He swallowed, throat tight. "Thank you." She smiled gently. "Thank you for writing the first chapters with me." That night, Bryce made her favorite dinner, butter noodles with garlic and spinach. They played old jazz records, the kind her mom used to love, and danced like they were learning how to again. They didn't talk about the past much anymore, not because it had disappeared, but because it had been woven into something larger, a truth they didn't have to carry in silence. Bryce sometimes wondered what their lives might have looked like if none of it had happened. If Olivia had never crossed that border, if he hadn't followed. But then he would look at her, camera in hand, gaze full of steady light, and realize that asking "what if" missed the point. What mattered was that they had crossed and returned together. summer returned like a soft breath. Not loud, not insistent, but unmistakable. The city warmed, jacaranda trees burst into lavender bloom, and life settled into a rhythm that didn't feel fragile anymore. Bryce had started volunteering part-time at the youth center, fixing things mostly: leaky faucets, broken door hinges, creaky chairs. But the staff appreciated his quiet presence, and the kids, especially the shy ones, seemed to gravitate toward him. Olivia had found her place too. She wasn't trying to disappear anymore. She didn't flinch when people asked about her work. She no longer referred to her drawings or photos as just something I'm playing with. She called herself an artist. The second run of her zine sold out at a local indie bookstore. They asked if she'd consider doing a talk. She declined, but sent more copies, signed each one in pencil, and added a new line on the final page: "You are not where you were." Bryce framed that page and hung it by the front door. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape, watching the sun slip behind rooftops, Olivia spoke into the quiet. "Do you ever think about going back to Mexico?" Bryce considered it. "I don't think I need to." "Me neither," she said. "But I think I want to go somewhere else, not away, just forward." He smiled. "College? Maybe, or maybe a residency. There's this program in the desert. Artists live in old trailers and make work for a month." He blinked. "You want to live in a trailer in the middle of nowhere?" She grinned. "Sounds kind of perfect, right?" He laughed, shaking his head. "As long as it has running water." They sat a while longer, the dusk deepening around them. Later that week, she applied to the residency. Her application wasn't a traditional one. Instead of an essay, she submitted a box, a curated collection of sketches, photos, audio clips, and handwritten notes. It was personal. It was raw. It was hers. A month later, the acceptance came. She stared at the email for a long time before showing it to Bryce. He didn't say anything at first, just hugged her. A long, quiet embrace that said everything words couldn't. "You okay with this?" she asked. "I will be," he said honestly. "You're ready?" They spent the next weeks preparing. Olivia made lists, bought hiking boots, packed her cameras. Bryce taught her how to change a flat tire and insisted she take a basic toolkit. "You never know with old trailers," he said. On the morning she left, they loaded up her borrowed car. The sun hadn't risen yet. The streets were still and blue. Bryce handed her a small, wrapped box. Inside was his old journal. "There's still a few pages left," he said. "I figured you might want to keep writing." She didn't speak, just nodded, eyes shining. At the driver's door, she paused. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for not giving up." He took a breath. "Thank you for letting me be your father again." She smiled, then leaned in and whispered, "I'm proud of you too." And then she drove. Bryce stood at the curb long after the car disappeared. The wind stirred the trees, a dog barked in the distance, and something settled in his chest. Not sadness, not even joy. Peace. That evening, he opened a new notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Olivia crossed a border. I crossed after her. But she's the one who showed me how to return." The sun dipped low. The house was quiet. And somewhere in the desert, his daughter was beginning a new chapter. The story of Bryce and Olivia Weiner isn't one of grand spectacle or headlines. It is the story of a father who refused to surrender to circumstance, of a daughter who walked through darkness and came back into light, and of the bond between them, stretched by distance, scarred by silence, but ultimately held together by something stronger than fear: love without condition. Bryce didn't have a roadmap. He had no special training, no authority, and at times, no legal support. What he had was resolve. What he carried was the quiet, unrelenting courage to step across borders, literal and emotional, for the sake of his child. And Olivia, though lost for a time, was never broken. Her survival wasn't just in being rescued. It was in choosing to live again, to create, to tell her story, to reach back toward herself with open hands. This was not a rescue in the classic sense. It was a return, a slow, patient reconstruction of trust. A father rebuilding a bridge to the person he loved most. A daughter finding the strength to walk across it. They are not perfect. They still carry the echoes of what happened, but they carry it together. And that, in the end, is where healing lives. So when we speak of heroes, let us remember, sometimes they wear flannel shirts and drive dusty cars across borders. Sometimes they hold sketchbooks and whisper truths into microphones. And sometimes they just stay. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Bryce Weiner didn't just find his daughter. He reminded the world, and her, that she was never truly lost. And in doing so, they found something else. The way home.
you.